Great, so my name is Stuart Carlton. I'm going to talk about a research project that I've been working on with some other researchers. It's really been led by Dr. Becca Nixon, who now works at the University of Delaware, but I'm doing some other stuff too, and we're supplementing in there, and I also want to acknowledge Yama. Boom! This is on community revitalization in Great Lakes areas of concern. Real quick, hands up if you're familiar with what areas of concern are. Most people are. If you aren't, really what it is, there are these 43 very degraded sites in the Great Lakes, right? And they're relatively large. They oftentimes encompass Superfund sites. But they're things that the federal government is spending a lot of money to try to clean up. Next slide. And, oh yeah, I could have just read that to you. Anyway, here they all are. And they're trying to make them all beautiful, right? Like this. And so the idea is, if we go to the next slide, it might have the thing, unless I changed it. Oh, there's the Grand Calumet. That just gives you an idea how big they are, right? And the Grand Calumet River is actually, this is my new stat. It's a 13-mile river that has all 14 beneficial use impairments. So that ratio of BUIs to river miles is way out of whack. Okay, now, next slide. So they're doing a whole bunch of work looking at the relationship between restoration or remediation, when they remediate the environmental ills, right, and then restore the ecosystems. Does this lead to community revitalization? And the EPA is doing a lot of work here. They have a diagram that is so complicated that I guess I cut it out without even remembering. And we're doing a lot of social science research sort of in that relationship between the restoration and the revitalization. What kind of evidence can we find that this is or is not happening? And so we've got sort of 3 threads of evidence that we've pulled so far. The first is these key person interviews. It was actually not the first chronologically, but it doesn't matter. We went and spoke with a bunch of leaders in there and said, hey, you know, is revitalization happening? And these are community leaders, people involved in the process. And we found out that, like, what do they even think of revitalization as being? And so they're looking for changes in the economy, changes in the housing, and those sorts of things. And they find out that trust is an important part, potentially, of the restoration and revitalization process, trust within these working groups. And that's where my research interest starts to come in. We also looked at secondary data. This recently came out in the Journal of Great Lakes Research. You can read the paper there if you want. But essentially, what we found out, Hope's telling me I'm talking too fast. What we found out is that if you look at the secondary data, it's not really obvious that revitalization is occurring in these communities. We looked at things like housing stock, population changes. We looked for signs of gentrification through changes in the demographic makeup. And we're not seeing a lot of evidence of that. That's not necessarily shocking. Community revitalization is not a quick process, right? There's no Ronco spray-on revitalization. Instead, it's something that takes a certain amount of time. It takes people moving and businesses developing. But that evidence isn't strongly there. What is there in the secondary data is evidence that all of these communities really value the lake or the area of concern that they are. Like, we looked at planning documents, we looked at, you know, different presentations and public works things, and so they all really value the lake, which is a sign that revitalization is priming there, right, even if it's not necessarily occurring. And then I also, I'm a part-time media content analyst, and so I went and looked at all the newspaper coverage to see if they're talking about revitalization in newspaper coverage of areas of concern. And when I say all, I mean a sample of course. And the answer is no, not really. Right now, this is a story about environmental degradation and federal cleanup money. Those are the primary areas that are covered under that. Next slide, please. And so what are we doing with all that? What's next? Mainly what we're doing is we're taking all this information and we're developing some materials for the EPA and partners in the individual areas of concern to use. What are some best practices that we can find based on these conversations, right? And then and we're coming up with case studies and things like that so that we can go to community members where they're still, you know, maybe earlier in on the restoration, revitalization process. And we say, here's what's worked in other places. Here's what hasn't worked. And so we're taking that research and developing outreach with it, which is why this is a great Sea Grant project. And then beyond that, we're going to do another little bit of research. As we've spoken with leaders, we've looked at secondary documents. What we have not done is spoken with, you know, John and Jane Q. Public, right? We're missing their story. And so we have a master's student now, Isabel Staff is her name, and she's going to go out into some of the communities and try to talk with people in the communities. So that's where we're headed next. What do we want? A couple things. This is a big topic across the area, right? There's all sorts of areas of concern, all sorts of interesting social science research to be done. There's some biophysical stuff that's going on too. And the other thing that we're really looking for is ways to take this and make it authentic for the community. Because what I lose sleep about at night is my children, but the second thing I lose sleep about at night is, you know, doing the classic thing of waltzing in as a, you know, nice cushy scientist, getting the data and leaving the community behind. And that happens all of the time, and I don't want that to happen. So we're looking for ways to try to turn this into something authentic and meaningful for the people who are sharing their experience with us. And with that, I will end on exactly 5 minutes. Thank you.